I don't even know what you're trying to say. You said that this was a trick question, but right now it sounds like you've fallen into your own trick. Like
No, no,
you're
no.
being incoherent.
No, I
Yeah,
think
there
I
are
think
groups of
I
there are
think you
group.
missed the point entirely.
No, I just think that you're really stupid. But if we're talking about a large group of individuals that are more suicidal, then yeah, there are varying different ways we go about addressing that. For some people, it might be medical intervention. For other people, it might be a change of society. For
But
some,
that doesn't
it
mean
might
that we
literally
give
be
them
fixing a
every
problem within themselves. Incels,
right.
for
Oh,
example,
good, good, good. Fixing a problem within themselves. I like that. I
yeah,
like that, Hunter.
like
Like,
incels.
why can't that be applied in this case?
Because we've tried that and it didn't work. Okay, you wanted to talk about the Texas bill and the Florida bill and determine that they were justified.
Exactly.
And
And
which one with Texas specifically? Is this the one where parents could be charged with child abuse for getting their children gender affirming care?
right, yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
So I wanna clarify that I don't agree with all of the measures that are in the bill, but I do agree with putting legislation forth just for the sake of sparking debate on the issue. And I also want to clarify that my focus is not on LGBTQ stuff like as a whole, but specifically the gender identity stuff. And I think that the gender identity stuff is sort of at the heart of why the legislation is proposed. But then again, I can't really speak for Republicans. Some of them may actually just, not want gay stuff to be taught in schools in general. Like that, I don't agree with. But I agree with putting legislation forward just so that we can spark a debate on the gender identity stuff, especially as it has to do with children.
So let's go over. I'm reading this here to let's see. Let's see. Hold on one second. I'm trying to find like a general rundown of what this is. Texas LGBT trying to explain. Hold on. Texas
Yeah,
Tribune.
I think
Some
I'm
experts
more.
doubt that classifying gender affirming care as child abuse would hold up in court. Sorry, there are people outside screaming. I don't know if you can hear that or not.
No, I can't hear that.
Every couple of months. Okay, hold on one second. I just want to make sure that I give a general summary of this. Abbott's directive followed a non-binding legal opinion from Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is also in the fight of his political life in Tuesday's primary election, that said gender-affirming care constitutes child abuse. Paxton's opinion cited body modification surgeries that medical experts say are rare, if ever, performed on children, but he also said it would be child abuse to administer gender-affirming care that is widely accepted by leading healthcare groups like puberty blockers, which are completely reversible. Under the gender-affirming model of care, experts say more time is spent allowing kids to socially transition. Okay. I think this is pretty general little rundown. So yeah, calling gender-affirming care child abuse. Now, you say you're down with this, not necessarily because you agree with everything, but because you think it opens up a good conversation. I'm not sure why an already marginalized group should need to suffer even further just to open up a conversation. Like, before this thing happened, we were all still having conversations about trans people and gender identity.
All right. Well, there's a couple ways I could address this, but I first want to talk about that idea of trans people being a marginalized group. As a black person, that kind of rubs me the wrong way because it's like you can be a white person, and if you don't identify as trans, you have white privilege. But then suddenly, if you say I'm trans, now you're a minority. And
Yeah,
as I mean, can
yes.
you
Wait,
understand
this
how,
would
as a black person, that kind of is weird because I don't get to identify out of being a minority in that same way.
Um, I I can maybe understand how from personal experience it feels weird, but I hate to tell you that just if you are kind of categorized as a marginalized group doesn't mean that you get to police when other people are part of a marginalized group also. I feel like a similar example would be, well, white people, right? They supposedly have white privilege, but what if they're in a wheelchair? Now they now they are
But
technically a marginalized group because
yeah,
they're
but
disabled, right? So,
but being in a wheelchair and being disabled, that's something that is objectively verifiable. Whereas being trans is like you can't really prove whether or not somebody is trans.
um,
And
I mean, if they're going through medical treatments and they've been confirmed gender dysphoric, I think you could. You
right,
might you
and
might mean that
I'm
you cannot like empirically prove what somebody's internal gender identity is,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
true. But I mean, if they're taking steps to express that externally, then I think it's pretty reasonable to deduce that they are in fact transgender.
I mean, it's reasonable-ish, but I mean, we both know that detransitioners exist, and the fact that there are detransitioners means that, just because somebody believes something at one point in their life doesn't necessarily mean that they are correct about that. And I do understand that detransitioners are supposedly a very small populate portion of the trans community, and I'm saying supposedly because when we look at those stats, we're typically not looking at desisters. We're looking at people that transitioned and then decided that they weren't trans afterwards. And I'm drawing a caveat there because I don't think that there's a clear line between people who desist before transitioning and people who desist after transitioning. And I think that if you were to look at the people who desist before transitioning, the amount of people that we consider to be detransitioners would be much more than what we are currently considering.
I mean, it would fully depend on how you're looking at this, and I think that we should talk about this, but just a little bit of a caveat here before we jump into that. You can still have white privilege and then be trans and then just not have cis privilege. So there are varying different degrees and types of privileges. This is why people talk about intersectionality. And although I recognize that word oftentimes is viewed as very cringy, very libcucky, all that means is just examining the way that various different oppression or marginalization, along with various different degrees of privilege, intersect. That's why it's called intersectionality. So
Right.
a trans person could be white. They could then transition, and then they could still have white privilege, but then they would no longer have cis privilege. So it's not like one cancels out another, just to be clear. And I don't think you were saying this, but just for the sake of it, nobody is transitioning to get rid of their white privilege or something
Oh
like
no,
that.
no, no, that's not what I was getting at. It's just the fact that being trans is not falsifiable, which is just another way of saying that you can't prove if a
I
person is
know.
objectively trans.
I know.
That creates a situation where you now have a minority group that exists on no objective basis whatsoever. And what concerns me about that is that you could easily do this again and just create minority groups based off of really anomalous, inaccessible categories. And I
Um,
think that is really problematic for like
well,
actual for
no,
like
because it's not.
people whose minority status is based in something that can be objectively verified.
Okay, but there's a lot of different degrees of identities that are unverifiable or unfalsifiable. Now, maybe those identities don't necessarily make them a marginalized group, but we already recognize varying different social identities, whether it be religion or even like sports fans, that are a form of identity that also, I mean, if we're talking about religious people, they get legal protection. But we also cannot necessarily objectively prove that somebody is in fact a believer in Christ. So
Right, but
I'm a little bit. I don't really like the language you're using here, because trans people are not just deciding to make something up to become a marginalized group. We're talking about, one, a group of people that have existed for virtually forever. Two, a group of people that are identifying with already socially constructed versions and understandings of gender. And three, we can objectively demonstrate that people who are trans are marginalized, whether it be the greater likelihood of being victimized by assault or violence, whether we're talking about the higher likelihood of getting kicked out of your home or being abused. So there is an quote unquote objective degree of marginalization that trans people experience.
but
Absolutely.
they can get out of that marginalization by just pretending to not be trans. trans.
No,
Like
because
they
why would
have
they
an
want to
they
pretend
have
to
an
not be
option
trans?
because they wouldn't want to be marginalized.
No, you don't understand. People that are trans are not usually just like deciding to be trans. We're talking about individuals that, for a lot of them, actually, it's been demonstrated that the way that their brain works perceives themselves differently than their biology, and they perceive themselves as being of the other gender rather than the gender that is usually correlated with their biological makeup.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would actually be willing to maybe grant that or entertain what you're saying if you had a group of people that were just like, yo, I think that today I'm going to be trans because I want to be marginalized. Ooh, woo. Then maybe you'd have a point, but that's not what's happening. This is why, historically, with LGBT individuals, we've seen conversion therapy never fucking work.
Right. And the issue of conversion therapy is something that I need to look more into because I have up until yet been unable to really see what they mean when they say conversion therapy doesn't work. But on the topic of
Well, wait,
people pretending
well, just to be clear, I don't know how much you need to look into it. I don't know every single thing about conversion therapy, but whether we're talking about an actual medical intervention, whether we're talking about a therapist trying to encourage you to be something that you are not, or whether we're talking about parents or religious institutes trying to shame you out of this identity, that is all considered conversion therapy, and it has all been demonstrated to be significantly harmful for the mental well-being of, again, an already marginalized group.
Yeah, I'm just not sure if I agree with the phrasing on that because, it seems like a rhetorical move to say that that's conversion therapy when you could just as easily say that giving a person hormones and telling them the social transition is a conversion in
It
itself. Like I feel
Wait,
like that's
it
a
would be. Yes, if somebody was not trans and then they were being pushed against their will to be something that they were not, that would be abusive and a form of conversion therapy. And guess what? That's already been demonstrated to harm mental health. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about individuals who have gender dysphoria, have been confirmed gender dysphoria, and then are pursuing treatment to try and alleviate that.
right, right. I understand what you're saying. I'm just not I I'm sure you've heard the term social contagion before. And
Yes.
I'm more in the camp of believing that a lot of the more recent trans identity is a result of social contagion. Like I mean I don't have the studies on me, but like you can find stuff that shows that it's mainly the younger generation of people that are coming out with non-binary and trans identities at a higher rate than the older generations. I don't really see how that can be explained without an aspect of social contagion being a part of it.
Well, I think
Uh,
that okay, so there's two layers to what you're saying here. And I'll even cede ground to you here also, because it is actually possible that there is a level of social contagion. I'm not going to deny that. We don't know what is and is not a social contagion, and especially because, and this kind of plays into the second layer, because now there is a uptick of people pushing for the acceptance of trans people, you're also simultaneously going to see more people freely expressing themselves as the gender that they identify as, because we are pushing for a more accepting society. There's still a long way to go, but as we're pushing for that, you're going to see people who are more comfortable identifying with the gender that they perceive themselves to be. So there's that. And then on the flip side, let's say that you're right. Let's say that there is a social contagion. I don't know if you're aware of this, but do you know that there's also a such a thing as a social contagion in relation to depression?
I can see how that would be the case, yeah.
Yeah. So we wouldn't then say depression is fake, depression is bad, bad people who are depressed are bad. We would say, to make sure that we are not falling into this social contagion and to make sure we're not going to be giving antidepressants to people who are not in fact depressed, we need to make sure that they are vetted properly. The same thing can be said for gender dysphoria and trans people. If somebody is saying they're trans because all their friends are doing it, and then they're taken to a gender clinic, it's up to that gender clinic to say, no, you don't have gender dysphoria. You don't need to go on this treatment.
Right, but as
So it's
far as
it's
I
not a
can
fault of the
tell,
trans people though. This is, if anything, it would be a fault or a failing of the gender clinics, which again is something that a lot of these Republicans push against.
as far as I can tell, affirmation is the default. Like I don't think I've seen a single case of a clinician saying no, you don't have gender dysphoria. And there's a second point I wanted to make with regards to the diagnostic criteria. For one, gender dysphoria, the symptoms match a lot of other symptoms of just like general anxiety and depression. And as a person who has like in the past just basically told the doctor whatever I needed to say to like get a prescription that I wanted. Like I don't have a lot of faith in a physician's ability to be able to see through a person who has been essentially coached by their Discord friends or their online community as to what to say to get the GD diagnosis. Like it's not that uncommon.
No, it's not though, because you don't understand is, and let me clarify again. Another caveat here is there are certain requirements that are necessary for going about diagnosing somebody with gender dysphoria and then moving forward to actually treat the gender dysphoria. If these standards are not always being followed, then again, just to be crystal clear, that is a fault on these institutions for not properly adhering to guidelines. It's not the fault of trans people or anything really to
No,
do
no,
with
no,
trans
no, no.
people at all.
Yeah,
But
no.
so it's not just my child likes the color pink and now he's on puberty blockers to be a girl. It's here is a persistent discomfort with your gender, and then you're diagnosed with gender dysphoria by several different therapists before you can then actually pursue treatment. The standards right now for adults are a persistent discomfort with your gender identity for the next 6 months consistently. And that's for adults. It's got to be even longer for children, I believe.
I know
So
what the on paper standards are, but I can definitely bring you examples of at least when it comes to adults, not with children, but
I
when it
don't
comes
care
to
about
adults.
I don't care about the examples because again, that would not be
Well,
any kind of an
you
argument against.
should
Hold on,
you
that would
should care
hold
about the
on,
example.
stop. That wouldn't be a argument or an argument against trans people. It would be an argument against these institutions not properly following standards. In which case, we would then want to condemn those institutions and demand that they adhere to the proper standards. We wouldn't want to start faulting trans people.
Well, no, the point is not to fault trans people, but pointing out that the institutions are not following the standards is also relevant, especially when it comes to the legislation, which is again why I say that the legislation is justified so as to spark a debate so that we can actually talk about the issue of institutions not following the standards because
No, you don't need this
it's not uncommon.
legislation. You don't need this legislation
I
to
think you need some sort of force in law to make this an issue that has to be debated
hold
because
on, wait.
otherwise the
Ta-
Democrats are going to just completely ignore it.
no. Putting forward legislation like the one in Texas that attempts to label parents following the current guidelines for their children who might have gender dysphoria as child abusers is doing nothing but harm. This isn't opening up a nice conversation. And you know what? Even if it was, at what fucking cost? Again, at the cost of an already marginalized group. This is almost just ridiculous. What you're saying
Yeah.
is,
Okay.
well,
Yeah.
we have to have this policy here to open up the conversation. We've already been having the conversation. We've already been having the conversation about the
No, you guys have
institutions.
been having a pretty one-sided conversation. Let me ask you something.
What are you talking about?
Do you agree that puberty blockers are experimental when it comes to use for transitioning? I know that we have used puberty blockers for precocious puberty,
Hmm.
but used for transitioning children, they are experimental, right?
When you say experimental, like what do you mean by
Meaning,
that?
meaning that we don't actually know the long-term effects of them.
No, we do. Yeah, we do.
Oh,
And
oh,
this
we
is
do?
yes, they've been around since at least the
Okay.
70s, I
So,
believe.
so let me ask you something else. Do you believe that puberty blockers are completely reversible?
There's going to be probably some kind of a permanent negative side effects. I believe, like
But
I think it's
would you
demonstrated like
agree?
a slightly lessening of bone density. But again, we would have to just talk about the
Oh,
risks
no, no, no.
and the benefits, and if the
It's more
benefits
than that. It's more than
outweigh
that.
the risks, right?
Right. Now, I can cite a trans surgeon, Marcy Bowers, who is transgender and has done over 2,000 confirmation surgeries. And I mean, I'll send you the link to this if I need to, but I have her on video saying that taking puberty blockers complicates gender confirmation surgery because the genital tissue is too there's too little genital tissue to actually perform the surgery, which in not medical speak means that the puberty blockers stunted the growth of the genitals so much that they can't actually do the surgery. And I
You
also,
even if that were correct, that's again like a side issue because if we're talking about now having trouble pursuing the surgeries in the future, the reason you even go on puberty blockers is to try and reduce your discomfort with your gender identity disaligning with your biological makeup, so that you can then later pursue surgery. So if there's a problem with the surgery being done, that again would be a side issue, and it certainly doesn't mean that we should just
uh,
leave people. Hold on,
uh,
wait. It
go ahead,
doesn't
go
mean
ahead.
that we should just leave people who have gender dysphoria in the dirt to be suffering from depression and a high suicide rate and just say, well, if you later want to get surgery, it might complicate things. We can deal with those complications separately. Right now, this medication has been demonstrated to lower the likelihood of suicidality and depression for people with gender dysphoria. And finally, Lupron, being the puberty blockers, was approved by the FDA in 1995. So yeah, we've been using this for a pretty fucking long time.
Yeah, but we do not use it on children during their puberty years. For what I
I
understand,
thought we used
Lupron
it for
or
precocious
puberty,
period, or excuse me,
yeah, that
precocious puberty.
I mean, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Like, it's during the growth spurt years specifically, because the argument that I'm making with regards to the genital tissue also applies to height, in that if you block puberty during the years where a child would uh, experience their growth spurts, which are typically like 13 to 15, if you block puberty during that time, there's no reason to believe that you're going to get that growth back just because you stop taking it. Like, it's not like puberty just goes on forever and people just keep growing. People,
No, it's
human beings stop growing at around age 18, and the growth spurts stop at around age 15. So if you've been blocking puberty during the years of the growth spurts, you're going to be shorter and your genitals are not going to grow.
So, according to medical news today, the effects of puberty blockers are physically reversible. Puberty blockers only pause the production of testosterone and estrogen hormones. Once a person stops using this medication, their body begins production once more, leading to the development of breasts and facial hair. However, although physical effects of puberty blockers are reversible, the Gender Identity Development Service in the United Kingdom notes that the researchers do not know how these types of medication psychologically affect a person. So no, it almost seems as though you have it backwards, that there might
Well,
be
no,
an
no, no, no,
issue with
no.
the mental.
No, read that again. They said breasts and facial hair. They didn't say anything about height and genital growth. They left that out on purpose.
Wait, I already know that there's a possibility of having a slightly lower height, but again, we don't need to be getting in the weeds about all of these details. We need to be
Well,
talking about, do the benefits outweigh the risks? And in this case, absolutely. The majority of children, or I shouldn't even say children, the majority of teenagers who have gender dysphoria go on to later transition, and going on puberty blockers helps them significantly. This has been demonstrated repeatedly. Even according to JAMA Network, they found that the puberty blockers were related to a 75% decrease when it came to suicidality. So yeah, they're like, we can talk about the possible negative side effects. I'm not saying it's completely perfect. Literally no medication is completely perfect. But you have to evaluate whether or not the risks outweigh the benefits. And in this case, it's a pretty clear-cut case of the benefits outweighing the risk.
I get what you're saying, and I have a counterpoint to that, but I have to preface this by saying that, this is, I don't have any facts to back that up. This is just purely just like philosophical speculation, but
Well,
I
I can
have to
tell it's
wonder.
speculation because it's wrong.
Well, I mean, you don't necessarily know that it's wrong, but let me ask you something. Like, if do you believe that beliefs can affect a person's emotional state?
Yeah.
So if you can convince somebody that they need puberty blockers and then they don't get them, does that belief in the need of the puberty blockers, can that evoke what we're calling gender dysphoria or some sort of feeling of unease of not getting the thing that you have been
N-
made to believe that you need?
no, because you're
Wait,
speculating.
why not? Why not? Why not? You just
Because
agreed that
hold on.
beliefs can affect emotional state.
Yeah, they can, but the example you laid out implies that this person is A-okay, and then all of a sudden they're being encouraged to go on puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are the currently approved medication for people that already have gender dysphoria.
Right.
So if
But do
somebody
you
has gender dysphoria and then they are uncomfortable because their gender identity disaligns with their biological makeup that is correlated with the gender that they do not wish to identify as, then when they know that there's, or if they need a medication that's going to help that, and going through puberty is going to worsen that, that would be bad. You're again like
but
speculating that they don't
okay,
have gender
but
dysphoria or something.
you acknowledged earlier that there could be an aspect of social contagion, and that's kind of what I'm operating under. Because I mean, I've been in discords, in gaming discords, and I've seen like a lot of the reaffirmation of like identities and that type of stuff. And I sort of lean towards believing that a lot of the gender dysphoria that we're seeing in the younger generation is being sort of fostered by the sheer amount of publicity that trans identities are getting.
Okay, I don't really care that much because one, it's good that trans people are getting publicity because we need more acceptance for trans people. Second of all, did you forget what I just said at the beginning of this conversation? That even if there was an element of social contagion, the answer then is to make sure that the gender clinics are adhering to the right and correct standards to
Well,
properly diagnose.
that's not the only answer. Another answer would be to give your children an education that gives them an alternative to taking experimental treatments that are going to stunt their growth.
No.
I don't think that's the
Why
only
would you
answer.
educate your child with gender dysphoria that the treatment that has been demonstrated to actually effectively help them is bad because they might lose a couple inches off their height? I know what you're talking
Because
about, and they lose a couple inches off their height, dude. We're not talking
because
about a massive. You're not going to turn into a midget if you go on fucking puberty blockers.
okay, now first I need to see if we agree. I've seen the study that says that most children desist around the age of puberty, like with the onset of puberty, they stop being dysphoric. Like I know that's hotly contested. I wanted to get your
Right.
take on that before I just put that forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure which study you're talking about exactly, but I do know that a lot of these studies that claim there's a really high desistant rate or desistance rate are based solely on referrals, not on diagnoses. So if you have a bunch of referrals coming in for people with gender dysphoria, and then they're vetted, and then they're said, and then the clinic says, you know what, no, you don't actually have gender dysphoria, and then this person leaves, that would be counted as a desistance.
That's
That's
not
not
what that's not what this preliminary Google search says. The majority of children diagnosed with gender dysphoria cease the desire to be the other sex by puberty, most of which
go. Can you send it
growing
to
up
me,
tried
please?
to
I'd like to look at it.
yeah. This is Wikipedia. Like I didn't, I just typed it up real fast, so this is probably not the most thorough article, but I mean I'm pretty sure the information is in there somewhere.
Okay.
Also, I'll send you what I Googled because it just gives you like the headline at the top.
Gender dysphoria in children. Yeah, which part were you reading?
Uh oh shit, did I not? Hold on, let me try
You
that.
sent me the entire Wikipedia article, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
fine.
wait
I'm
wait a
wondering.
second. Wait a second. Let me try that again.
Let's see here.
This is what I Googled. So try that, and then I just read the thing that's at the top.
The majority of children diagnosed with gender dysphoria cease to desire to be the other sex by puberty, with most growing up to identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. All right, we need to find out what part of that is. Hold on. Let's see. Let's see.
Oh yeah, it's in the second paragraph.
Okay, yeah, I see it
Let's
now.
look at the.
Gender dysphoria in children is more heavily linked to adult homosexuality than to adult transgender identity, especially with regards to boys. All right, let's see. There's the part we just read. Prospective studies indicate that this is the case for 60 to 80% of those who've entered adolescence. Puberty alleviates their gender dysphoria. The prospective studies have been criticized on the basis that they count as desisters cases where the child met the criteria for gender identity disorder as defined in the DSM 3, but would not have met the updated criteria for gender dysphoria. Okay, cool. So yeah, if you're using old criteria, it's quite possible then that you would see a large desistance rate. But again, we have updated criteria for how we diagnose gender dysphoria now. So
Okay.
this is
Yeah, I
nice,
mean,
but
yeah.
this is why you have to read the whole thing, because when you look at it, I mean, they were being diagnosed as gender dysphoric based on criteria from 1980s.
I mean, the
So
age of the
that's
study
pretty
doesn't
outdated.
necessarily make it false.
No, no, no.
Like,
You're right. But the standards they were using to determine whether or not somebody was gender dysphoric does matter. And if you're gauging from something back from 1980, where they had very little understanding of gender dysphoria or trans issues at all, then this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't hold up. I
I
can.
mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that we have much more understanding of trans issues, like gender dysphoria now, than we did
Yes,
then.
we do.
It's still pretty inaccessible.
No, we have a much better understanding. We're still learning, as is medical and scientific fields always are adapting and changing for the better. But yeah, I hate to tell you, but uh, this is using really old standards, so it had a way higher positive rate. I can send you
Oh,
a
I see.
newer study done by Let me see if I can find it. Hold on.
Let me see if I can get the DSM-5 current standards.
So let's see. A new study by Turbin and other researchers from the Fenway Institute and Harvard Medical School found that 13.1% of currently identified transgender people have, quote, detransitioned at some point in their lives, but that 82.5% of those people attributed their decision to external factors such as pressure from family, school environments, and vulnerability to violence. So this is what I mean. Is the same conservative mantra that happens every fucking time. They complain about a problem that they are actually creating. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when you have Abbott and a bunch of chuckle fucks putting forward legislation to try and designate legitimate helpful treatment as child abuse, you make it actually so it's harder to be trans. You now make it so that you could possibly see a higher detransition rate. You can't invoke the detransition rate while simultaneously arguing that trans people are bad or whatnot, while that contributes to the
No,
detransition
no,
rate.
I'm not arguing that trans people are bad. I'm arguing that the medical community is not appropriately addressing the levels, like the role that like belief systems and social circles play in trans identity. Like that's where a lot of my trepidation comes from, is that
Well, then why are we
like
not
I,
having
I
this conversation?
well, I mean, that's kind of how I was getting to that conversation. Like the Abbott stuff makes this something that has to be talked about. Whereas, like, if you don't do something to spark the conversation, then like the Democrats are just going to keep steamrolling through and pretending like nothing, like there's no issues.
Um, cool story, bro. Like, we don't need to be further instigating an already marginalized group because the Democrats. This is You're not really
Well,
being very
I
coherent
don't,
right
I don't,
now.
I don't, I don't, I don't think you got the point. Like, if left up to the Democratic Party, they will not red flag anything with transit. Like, they don't care, and they will basically just allow the medical community to keep leaving out information like stunted growth and genitals not growing
I'm a
when using
Democrat,
puberty
and I
blockers.
feel like I'm pretty open to having this convo with you.
But didn't you earlier say that it was that they were completely reversible, or did I mishear
I
that?
said they're mostly reversible. There might be some long-term effects, as possibly like a decrease in bone density, but the bone density issue is actually solved when you go on hormones later. And like I already said, a couple inches off your height, I think, is a fair price to pay so that you don't hang yourself from the nearest ceiling fan.
Right. It's
But
well,
maybe
I'm gonna
that's just
address I'm
me.
gonna address the suicide thing too, but it's not just height, it's also your genital growth. So imagine you're a male who got put on puberty blockers during your growth spurt years, and then you realized, oh, I'm not actually trans. But now, because you were on puberty blockers, now not only are you gonna be short, but you're gonna be stuck with the size of your genitals that you had like before puberty. Like you're stuck with like a child-sized, penis until like for the rest of your life, basically. Unless you think that simply stopping it is gonna make that growth come back, which I don't think there's any Like if you research how puberty works, like there's no real scientific justification for believing that that growth is just going to continue just because you stop.
Well, I'm gonna look that up next. Right now, I'm still looking up the current DSM thing. Current DSM standards, gender dysphoria.
I also wanted to comment on the suicide thing because I know this is going to be a really touchy subject.
Well, hold on. Before we go on to another touchy subject, let me just read this real quick.
Okay.
Gender dysphoria, a concept designated in the DSM-5 as clinically significant distress or impairment related to a strong desire to be of another gender, which may include desire to change primary and or secondary sex characteristics. Okay, so the 1980s one was, although somewhat similar, had a very crucial difference. It was, first of all, it was put under sexual deviations, which is just incorrect. The defining characteristics of this diagnosis were discomfort about one's assigned sex, so not gender, but sex at the time, cross-dressing in reality or fantasy. So that's why part of the reason why you would have higher detransition rates when applied with these standards, because little boys who put on their mom's high heels would be taken to the clinic as possibly being gender dysphoric or having, I guess at the time it was gender identity disorder.
You know, that sounds a little bit.
Only to then
bit,
be
go
dismissed.
ahead, go ahead.
Only to then be dismissed. So you wouldn't count that as detransitioning.
Well,
Or desisters.
The cross-dressing sounds a little bit like autogynephilia, although I don't know if you can really attribute that to prepubescent kids, but I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. You'll have to explain to me what exactly that means.
Autogynephilia is it's a condition where basically a male like derives sexual pleasure from dressing up as a woman, and again, like I don't think you
No,
can
it
really
says
apply
as
that
the
to
other
like
sex, but not for the purpose of sexual excitement.
okay, right. But
So
yeah,
no.
I just wanted to throw that out there. I think that's more applicable to like adult age because I mean I don't know about you, but a lot of the trans people that I encounter on Twitter, like it's not uncommon for them to be posting nudes and have like OnlyFans and all that stuff. So I mean I'm just saying that I don't think autogynephilia is completely unfounded as a concept.
All right, let's see.
But I mean are you looking up something?
Yeah, I'm looking up if it can actually hurt genital growth. In both cases, puberty blockers will temporarily stop or limit growth and height development of sex drive.
Yeah, let me see if I can find you this chart. Because I know that most of the sources that you can find are gonna say it's temporary, but I think that they are not telling the whole story. So I'm gonna
Well, I
send you
hate
this
to tell you, but I'm not going to trust Discord user 112 to give me better medical advice than the current medical
no.
consensus on the matter.
Well then trust the facts that I'm about to like. I don't make
Like the
arguments
facts you
that are
just
not
sent
based.
me about how
I do
actually they
not
all
make I do
detransition.
not make arguments that are not based in fact, all right?
You just did.
I do not make arguments that are
You
not
said,
based
look how many people desisted at puberty, and then we looked at it and it was completely wrong. So,
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and review that. I'm not entirely sure that that has been interpreted correctly, but I'll let you
the
have that for now.
article you sent me is what said it.
Right, but
It said it was heavily
you're going
scrutinized for using
right,
a
but
bad standard.
you're going under the assumption that because these standards are older that they're wrong, which I don't necessarily agree with.
Okay, you're
That's
being
a
really.
very
Hold on,
that's a,
shut
no
up
no no this
right
is
now.
a,
Shut the fuck up because you're being weaselly and bad faith. I
no no
am
no
not
I'm
saying just
no no no
because it's.
no.
I'm going to mute you if you don't shut up. I'm not saying because it's old that means it's bad. I'm saying the older standard was not sufficient, so you had more people that fell under the umbrella of possibly having gender dysphoria who were then dismissed, which contributed to a significantly higher rate of detransitioners or desisters, excuse me. You're being bad faith right now.
All right, I will let you have that for now because I haven't done the due diligence on that issue. How about that?
Okay. Well, it says, what do pubertal blockers do? This is according to Mayo Clinic. Sex hormones affect primary sex characteristics. Okay. Let's see.
Puberty.
The use of the GnRH pauses puberty, providing time to determine if a child's gender identity is long-lasting. It also gives children and their families time to think about or plan for the psychological, medical, developmental, social, and legal issues ahead. If an adolescent child decides to stop taking medication, the puberty will resume. Okay.
All right,
I'm
so
trying to find anything specific on genital growth.
I'm pretty sure I can find that. Well, what I'm trying to direct you towards are charts that show like the time scale of like growth spurts to basically establish this idea that human growth doesn't just continue indefinitely. Like there's so many resources on this. Jesus Christ. Like there's like based on all of the science of how puberty works, there's no reason to believe that if you were blocking somebody's puberty during their growth spurt years that would just resume, especially when you consider the fact that like most people don't grow at all after age 18 and most people reach their max height at age 15.
I don't even think
And
that's
after
no,
age
maybe
15,
for women, but I know for a
no,
fact that
dude.
both
No,
me and my
I'm sending you the links. I'm sending you the
both me
fucking
and
links,
my
dude. I'm
father had
sending you
growth
the links,
spurts and
dude.
around the age of
I am
20.
sending you the links. It might not be the exact same for everybody, but this is well established in science. Like you have no argument against the idea that like growth spurts stop,
No, but
right?
the growth spurts happen because of hormones, right? So if you're pausing those hormones and then those
That's
hormones
that's what you would
resume,
think.
then you're going to most likely continue.
That's
Now,
what you
true,
would
I'm being
think.
intuitive here, but you've been intuitive this entire time. So I feel that that's a reasonable deduction.
Right.
Let's
I can point you to two twin studies, one of them better than the other one, but it's a twin study of a trans two identical twins. One of them is trans and one of them is not trans. And well, this won't say anything about their height. Actually, no, never mind. This won't. You already agreed that they might lose some height, so this won't say anything about the
Right,
gender.
and it even says we're not sure if puberty blockers have negative side effects on bone development and height. Research so far shows that the effects are minimal. Okay,
Well,
if you
let
have
me be
erectile
clear.
tissue and you think you might eventually want to have a vagina, talk with your primary care provider. Okay, vaginoplasticity is the surgical procedure that creates a vagina. If you start taking puberty blockers early in puberty, you might not be able to have the plasticity surgery that is most commonly used in Canada later as an adult. Okay, so yeah, there you go. That's a very real risk then, it sounds like, according to this source. In which case, again, we would have to talk about if the risks outweigh the benefits, or if the benefits outweigh the risks. And if we're talking about people that have a 75% decrease in suicidal ideation after beginning this treatment, I think that they can most likely figure out a better way to move forward from there. I would say that the risks do not outweigh the benefits,
I
because
mean,
you
hopefully.
might end up killing yourself by the time you even reach the age where you might want to go forward with a surgery like that.
Right. Can we talk about the suicide thing for a second? I'm gonna be extra careful about how I approach this. But I've
Hold on.
heard this argument. Okay.
One more time, sorry. Or one more thing, sorry. There are alternative techniques available, such as the use of a skin graft or colon tissue. Okay, cool. Thank you to, what's this website here? Transcare from Canada Provincial Health Service Authority. Very cool. So, yeah, you're right. Maybe their genitals will be a little too short to use the tissue to do the gender reassignments or the sex reassignment surgery then, but there are alternative techniques that already are available that already been shown to work. So your argument literally is completely baseless. So yeah,
No,
we can
no,
go on to
no.
the next thing then.
Well, I need to make one more point. You're still missing one part. If you are a male and you go on puberty blockers and you decide that you're no longer trans, you are now faced with the prospect of being shorter than you otherwise would have been and having a tiny penis for the
Not a
rest of your
tiny
life.
penis. You take a risk that it
You-
might decrease minimally. It said the effects are minimal in that department. However, you are taking a risk, yes, an informed risk, because it has been demonstrated that that lowers the suicidality. So,
and
if
yeah,
you're
and informed
suicidal,
risk that
living a shit
yeah.
life, and you're really fucking sad all the time, and you want to kill yourself because you're so uncomfortable in your body, I think that most likely, if you consent, You are making an informed decision, and you are taking an informed risk.
You think a minor can consent to this kind of thing? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it would depend. If they have written documents from their
So,
therapists,
a
then
minor
they're not the ones who
can't
are solely.
consent to sex, but they can consent to treatments that will affect their sex organs. That's what you're saying?
Wait, a minor can't consent to other things either, but they can still undergo
So
certain
why can they
surgeries. Wait. Are you saying that nobody should receive any medical treatments until they're over the age of 18?
Not necessarily, but I don't think that an underdeveloped kid can consent to medical treatments that affect their genitals. I'm talking about this specific issue.
Okay, you realize that kids already are circumcised without any consent. So,
right, and I think there's an argument that that should not be done.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's just that this idea that like children are nothing but like robots until they turn 18 is ridiculous. If a child is able to express the fact that they are gender dysphoric and are suffering and are depressed and want to kill themselves, and then they are confirmed to be that way from varying different medical institutions, then yes, putting them on a treatment that is largely reversible is not a bad thing. You're helping the child in that case. And that's exactly why you shouldn't be labeling that thing a fucking as child abuse like they are in Texas.
Well, it is doing experimental procedures on children that
it's not experimental. You're just saying things. Why are you just saying things right now?
Dude, you admitted that they don't know what the fucking long-term effects are. It's super experimental.
So, by this logic, you shouldn't be letting girls who are under the age of 18 begin birth control either. Because that too could affect their genitals.
I mean, yeah, I've heard some horror stories from girls about birth control, but I mean, I don't have that experience, so I can't give a
it doesn't
really
matter. It's that it doesn't hold weight because you're fine with other forms of treatments that minors undergo that have the potential to affect their genitals, and they still do it, and most of them are fine, like birth control. We're not talking about a kid again who just they wanted the girl Happy Meal at McDonald's, so now they're going to get their dick chopped off. That's not what's happening here. We're talking about
that kind of does sound like what it is. You just have to add they felt dysphoric because they didn't get the girl Happy Meal. You just got to add one more thing to it, and then that's what you got.
Okay, so you're actually just fucking retarded then.
No, I don't think so. How is that different? Like, it's.
Do you think that? Have you been listening to even a word I've been saying this entire time? I read to you that they need to be consistently showing signs of gender dysphoria for 6 months plus. They have to have various different.
Are on paper. That's what the standards are on paper, Hunter. You have no reason to believe that that's what actually goes on in these clinics.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the talk. I'm not going to waste my time with you anymore. You're either super bad faith or actually just fucking demented.
Can I make my point about the suicide thing before we hang up?
You know what? Sure. But just let you know that there is also a higher suicide rate for white males, and your conversation and your bad faith. Okay, so hold on, wait, shut up for one more second. Your bad faith dipshit arguments are contributing to that statistic because now I want to kill myself. So thanks for that.
So can I make the point or not?
Sure.
I think you know what I'm going to say. So does a person being suicidal mean that we have to do everything in our power to change society to make them not suicidal?
I mean, if we want to go based on how the law works, yeah. Usually if somebody's suicidal, you can literally call the police.
You know this is a trick question, right? You know this is a trick question, right?
Okay, why? Why is it? How's it a trick question?
Because like a lot of incels are suicidal. And they're suicidal because they're lonely and they can't get laid. But we don't turn around and say like, oh, we need to restructure society so that incels can get laid. Like we don't do that. We acknowledge that, unfortunately, not everybody's mental health issues can be accommodated by society.
Because we're not talking about society right now. We're talking about medical intervention.
Right, but no. I'm talking about the fact that there have been large movements in society to make trans people more comfortable, which is good, but that them being suicidal in itself doesn't warrant that.
I don't even know what you're trying to say. You said that this was a trick question, but right now it sounds like you've fallen into your own trick. Like you're being incoherent. There are groups of
you missed the point entirely.
No, I just think that you're really stupid. But if we're talking about a large group of individuals that are more suicidal, then yeah, there are varying different ways we go about addressing that. For some people, it might be medical intervention. For other people, it might be a change of society. For some,
that doesn't
it might
mean that we
literally
give
be
them
fixing a problem within themselves. Incels,
Right.
for
Oh,
example,
good. Fixing a problem within themselves. I like that. I
yeah,
like that, Hunter.
like
Why?
incels.
Why can't that be applied in this case?
Because we've tried that and it didn't work.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that.
All right.
Because
Yeah. No, dude, shut the fuck up. You are actually so stupid.
sure about
I think
that because
no. I
I
think that
would
you're over
refer
here.
you-
I think
would
that
refer you back to the fact that most of the people that are claiming a trans identity are now the younger generation.
I already
So
explained this to you.
seems that
I already explained this to you.
Clearly with age, people grow out of it. That's all I'm saying.
No, you've not demonstrated that. You sent me one Wikipedia article, and upon looking at it, it was actually incorrect.
The fact that it is mainly the younger generation that is claiming a trans identity suggests that with age, people will grow out of it.
Oh my god, I want to hang up on you so bad, but you keep saying really dumb shit. So you realize that as society became more accommodating of gay people, we saw an uptick in gay people, right? You realize as a society became more accommodating of...
But there's a difference.
You realize that as
between
society
gay people and
became...
trans people.
Shut the
There's
fuck
a
up,
difference between
please.
gay people and trans
Shut
people.
up. You're so
Because
stupid. I don't want to hear
gay-
you talk anymore.
Being gay is objectively verifiable, whereas being trans is not.
Gender dysphoria is objectifiable.
Oh, no, it's not.
And
It's
also,
not
nothing is
objectively
completely
verifiable.
objective in that degree. You also can't objectively prove somebody's sexuality.
Yes,
So
you can.
that's a dumb
wanna hear
argument.
You want to hear
So,
the
second
experiment
of all-
I would run? You want to hear the experiment I would run?
No, I think that you should be studied in an experiment for how...
You don't want to hear it because I have the answer to that question already, Hunter.
No, I think that you should be... I think that you should be literally...
You can run an experiment. You can run an experiment to determine what a person's sexuality is, at least beyond a reasonable doubt. Do you want to hear what that experiment is?
Sure, please.
You ever heard of eye tracking?
No.
You've never heard of eye tracking, Hunter. Come on, you're an internet boy.
Oh, wow, I guess I'm so dumb because I haven't heard of this one thing. Make your fucking point so I can hang up on your ass.
I thought you were an internet boy. Like, you can literally put a person in a scenario where they're given a bunch of different visual stimuli of males and females, and then just track their eyes and see what they look at, which sex they look at, what body parts they look at. And I guarantee you that if you did that, if you compiled enough data, you would be able to determine what that person's sexual orientation is beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right,
And
so
you
I have
can't-
one
you
too. I
can't
think
do
that you can
anything like that.
objectively prove if somebody's trans and has gender dysphoria. You just set them in a room and put a bunch of pictures in front of them, and if they look at the pink color, then we've determined they're trans. This is how fucking stupid you sound right now. So again, you're trying to make some social contagion argument, and the last thing I want to say is we also saw an uptick in interracial marriage when that was legalized and then became more socially acceptable.
Oh yeah, 'cause
when
they wouldn't
society
fucking
becomes
kill you.
more
They
accommodating.
wouldn't fucking kill you, dude.
Yeah,
What
and
kind
guess
of
what?
argument is that?
Trans people are also not getting killed at the same rate that they used to be because of transphobes like you. So what is your goddamn point? Listen, at the end of the day, I truly think, I think the best experiment we could do is stick you in a box and have scientists look at you and try to determine how somebody as dumb as you manages to function in the real world. How have you not fallen off the toilet every time you get up? How do you not have one of those little life alert buttons? Because I don't even know if you're smart enough to even walk down the fucking stairs.
I have a mortgage. I have a degree from a top 15
Wow,
university.
really? That you're owning yourself
say
right
shit
now
about my
then.
intelligence.
Damn, so you
can't
gotta
say shit about
you
my
got a
intelligence,
degree
brother.
from a top institution and
I
you're
had
this
an
dumb?
academic scholarship.
Do you
dude.
think that there's a
can't
way
say
for you to
shit
get a
about my intelligence.
Hey, do you think that there's a way for
I
you to
am
get
su-
Hey,
Dude, I'm
hey,
succeeding in
hello,
life
buddy.
in every fucking metric, dude. What are you talking about?
Do you think that maybe you could still get a refund for that degree? Because clearly it didn't work. Where did you go?
I don't
Trump
think-
University?
I can't get a refund because I had a fucking academic scholarship. I didn't pay shit, dumbass.
Oh, okay, cool. I thought maybe you went to Trump University because that's about as smart as you seem after getting your so-called quote-unquote degree. Fuck you and stop being a transphobe, okay? Go fuck yourself.
All right, have a
God, man, I hate these fuckwits. Well, that went well. And now my throat feels better too, so very nice. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the bell so you get notified when I drop a new video.